Now, I'm going to talk about end value rules, which is also known as fixed formula progress reporting. End value rules, also known as fixed formula progress reporting. Now, what does end value rules mean? It's a way of measuring progress. Now, have you worked on a project where you need to track progress, which means you have to ensure people are working according to schedule, right? So, end value rules, fixed formula progress reporting is something that helps us to track the progress of project activities in our projects. And that's why we're talking about it. So, in fixed formula progress reporting, it's a technique that creates a consistent status report for project activities. And instead of having a gut feel of percent completion from each person on a project, this type of reporting is essentially binary. So it's a way of tracking progress of your project activities. Let me give you an example. So let's say, and let's say that your organization for the project you're working on, you can decide to use 25-75%, 50-50%, 40-60, anything that makes up to 100%. So if it's 25-75%, right? If that's the, if that's what we're doing, 25-75%, then this is how you report. So let's say you have a painting task. So you have a painting task. Let's say that task has not started. If the task has not started, I'll record 0% complete. If the task has not started, I report 0% complete. Now, the moment the task starts, I'm going to immediately record 25%. And when the task finishes, the remaining 75% is added, making 100% complete, right? So this is how it will read: 0%, 25%, and 100%. Now, this is if we were using 25-75%. If we are using 50-50%, for the same task, this is how we're going to read it. 50-50% will say 0% if the task has not started, then 50% the moment the task has started, then 100% the moment the task finishes. So this is how you report it. Now, we use fixed formula progress reporting when it's difficult to measure the progress of task. So that's when you use it. And it's a binary report. It says this type of reporting is essentially binary. What do we mean by binary? What comes to your mind when we talk about binary? Binary numbers are zeros and ones. What comes to your mind when we talk about binary numbers are zeros and one? So when we say this is a binary report, it means it's a report where we are only interested in two things, and that is the the task has started, one, and the task has finished. So it's going to be 010, right? That's all we need to know. So that means we only report when the task has started, we only report when the task has finished, thereby getting 25%, 100%, or 50, 100. Now, that means that if you're reporting project activities using end value rules, fixed formula progress reporting, you're not really going to pay attention to the percentages. You know why? Imagine a task is just starting and we're immediately giving it 50%. That sounds crazy, doesn't it? So, in end value rules or fixed formula progress reporting, if that's the way you're reporting project activities, then the percentages at the beginning do not really matter, right? Because if I start a task and say I'm 50% complete, then you should raise your eyebrows. How did you get there? So it's a type of reporting. And why do you use it? Number one, it's used when it's difficult to measure a task. It's also used when you don't want gut feel of percent completion. Now, what does gut feel of percent completion? It's you're asking your team members for how far they've gone, and they just tell you anything that comes from their gut. Yes, gut is close to your stomach or somewhere around there. And they just say anything that comes out of their mouth. That is gut feel. So you're asking the painter, Mr. Painter, how far have you gone with the painting task? When you ask him, he stops painting, then you just see his eyeballs going around the facilities painting, and you're just wondering what he's doing. And says, the way I'm looking at this job is like 26.18% complete. And you're just looking at him. Now, how he got 26, then he got 0.18, you don't know. That's what we call gut feel. When people just tell you anything that comes out of their mouth, is gut feel. So you're working on a project, you don't want people to be giving you gut feel, maybe because there's no real easy way to measure progress. And then you can just fix it for them and say, look, everybody in this project, if you want to measure progress, when you start, report 25%. When you finish, report 100%. So that's how you report status on your project activities. Then we have another approach, which I personally prefer. It is called the weighted milestone approach. Now, in this second option, you're going to divide your project into milestones, right? And you divide the activity into different multiple milestones with a measurable output for each section of work, right? So end value rules, you fix what they report when you start 25% and when you finish 75%. That's if you're using 25, 75%, or 50, 50%, or 40, 60. It really doesn't matter. It's left your team to decide what the split of percentages will be. Now, in weighted milestone, we divide the work into milestones with a measurable output for each section of work. What does that mean? What does that mean? So let's talk about the same painting task activity. But this time around, let's imagine that the painter is painting a room that has 4 equal surface areas. The painter is painting a room with 4 equal surface areas. So if that's the case, it means that each wall is a quarter of the job. So in weighted milestone, we're going to divide the painting job into multiple milestones. And once the painter has reached those milestones, right, we will just give him the percent complete. So if the painter has not started, it's going to report 0% complete. The moment the painter paints the first wall, it's going to be 25% complete. When he paints the second wall, it'll be 50% complete. When he has painted the third wall, it will be 75% complete. And once he paints the third wall, it will be 100% complete. Right. So, so that's exactly what the weighted milestone approach is. The weighted milestone approach helps us to divide the activity into multiple milestones and assign percentages for each milestone. That's what we're saying. All right. Now, I want us to think about the last time we handled a project. Were you able to track the percent completion of your project activities? How were you able to, know how far your project has gone? Right. That's exactly what we're saying. Because in managing a project, we need to be able to track our task. We need to be able to track our project activities. And that's why we're talking about these two approaches, right? Weighted milestone and end value rules. I remember there's a project that that had to do with us delivering 200 packs. So I was working on a project where we had to deliver 200 entrepreneurial startup kits. Entrepreneurial startup kits across 4 countries. Across 4 countries. And every week on this project, I was giving report percent completion. Do you know what I did? What I did was I just used the number of deliveries to determine the project completion. So let's say we had delivered 50 kits, right? All I did was 50 divided by 200, and that's how I got the percentage of the project. And in this case, it is 25%. So as we were delivering the packages, I was calculating percent completion. You have to find a way to, I hope you understand what I'm saying. So since the deliveries were the goal of the project, and what happened was that the company that was handling the promotion will give us names every week. So the number of names we deliver, I just divided over 200. And when they ask me what's the status of project, I'll tell them this is the status. We're 25% complete. Because the time we are, when we get to 200 over 200, that means the project is complete. So I'm just giving you a hint of, because you need to track what will you tell the sponsor? How will you create reports? You have to find a way. So there are two ways here: end value rules and fixed formula progress reporting. Now let's go into the second task. The second process. The first process was where we created a plan cost management. Now this is where we estimate cost. And what we're actually estimating here is the cost of each activity in your project. We are estimating the cost of each activity. And in estimating the cost of your activities, it's largely based on the cost of resources required to perform the activity. If you think about it, when you are executing a project, you're actually paying money for activities to be done. And the activities depend on the resources you have available. So take, for example, if I want to estimate the cost of painting on a project, I'm going to estimate the cost of resources associated with painting. So for example, if I want to know the cost of painting, I'm going to find out how much the painter charge is, labor charge, right? Right. To know the cost of painting, I have to know how much I'm going to pay the painter. Then I'm going to look at the materials the painter is going to use, which is maybe a paint bucket or 2 or 5 or 10, depending on. Then the equipment, maybe he has to hire it, maybe spray gun, paint gun or something, right? So if you ask someone, what's the cost of painting? They're going to calculate the labor charge, the number of paint buckets, and the renting of paint gun to determine the cost of the activity. What I'm trying to say is that the resources assigned to an activity is one of the primary ways of determining the cost of the activity. And that's what we're saying. So let's look at the estimate cost process well to see other things that may be involved in estimating the cost of the activities. Now, don't forget the cost management plan, because this is where we saw the level of accuracy of the cost estimate. So even when we are costing our activities, we should also follow the cost management plan in terms of the cost range, the accuracy of the cost estimate. Then we also have what we call the quality management plan. The quality management plan is going to determine the quality standards of your project. And the quality standards is going to influence the types of resources you're going to buy for your project. If you know a little bit about construction, you don't have to know much. If you know a little bit about construction, when they're building houses, if you want a POP ceiling, and the POP ceiling is more or less where they use white cement and make some very lovely, it looks a very smooth ceiling, right? If that's what you want, it's going to cost you more than a regular ceiling. So the quality standard to which your job is going to be will also influence the cost of the activity, because the resource or material you need to use is going to be more expensive, right? It's just like, let me talk about paint, quality of paint. We have two major types of paint. We have satin and we have emulsion, right? Now, emulsion paint is a type of paint that, if there's a stain on your wall, if it's emulsion, you can't wash off this paint. But if you're painting your house with satin paint, if there's a stain on your wall, you can literally wash it off. But guess what? Satin paint and emulsion paint are not the same cost. So the quality standard to which you want to attain in your activities is going to influence the cost of those activities. And we also have what we call the scope baseline. And the scope baseline includes the deliverables of the project. And of course, the deliverables are those things we're going to work on as well. Now, lessons learned, that means from past areas of the project, we may have learned something that can help us in costing project activities. The project schedule is an input, and it's a very important input, because the project schedule tells us how long activities are. And how does activity duration affect cost? Activity duration affects cost because some resources are going to be paid based on the duration they spent on the activity. So take, for example, you are paying a bricklayer, a foreman or a bricklayer per day. You're paying them per day. the amount of money you're going to pay will depend on the duration of that task. And that's why the schedule is important in costing your project activities. Then we have what we call the resource requirements. Now, resource requirements is very important because this is where we look at the different types of resources assigned to our activities. And the resource requirements come in three types of resources: personnel, material, and equipment. So there. Now, what does that mean? So when you assign resources to an activity, there are three categories of resources. And of course, these resources determine the cost of the activity to a large extent. Another thing that we need to consider in costing activities is risk. So if an activity has a risk, we're going to analyze that risk and create a contingency reserve for that activity. Now, what does that mean? What does a contingency reserve mean? Contingency reserve is money that you've kept aside for the sake of risk. And this contingency reserve will be added to the cost of the activity. You know, contingency reserve is money that you've kept aside for certain risk. It's not money for the activity, but money just in case a risk happens on that activity. Let me give you a good example of what a contingency reserve looks like. So let's say that you want to travel by road to another city. You are traveling by road to another city, right? And you already have your budget for that activity. You already have a budget for that activity. And maybe you need like 20,000 naira to buy fuel, and that's all you need. Is it, are you just going to go with just the money for fuel if you're taking a trip to another city? I'd like to ask someone here.
No.
No, thank you. That's not a wise way to travel. We are most likely going to take the money that we need to travel and some extras. Why do we take extras? It's actually because of risk. So the money that you keep aside for risk is called a contingency reserve. So let's say I am budgeting 20,000 naira for a trip. I probably want to take 10,000 naira as contingency reserve as minimum. So contingency reserve is the amount of money you keep aside for risk you've identified, right? That can happen on that activity. And then we have enterprise environmental factors and organization process assets, which includes your uh, uh, historical information, lessons learned, and we can also have access to past projects and get cost estimates from them. Now, how do we estimate cost? How do you estimate cost? That's the tools and techniques. So tools and techniques are the how-to of every process. How do I estimate cost? An expert can help me. I can get an expert's judgment, and that person can tell me the cost of project activities. This is what a quantity surveyor does on a project, on a construction project. A QS is an expert when it comes to estimating cost. A quantity surveyor is an expert on your average construction project that can actually give you cost of activities, project activities based on expert judgment. Then we have analogous estimating. So when we talk about analogous estimating, I'm sure you still remember analogous. Analogous estimating is an estimate you create because of past experience. So let's say that you're painting a house. You now remember the last time you painted a house with the same size in the past 6 months, it cost you 500,000. So using analogous estimate, since the area you want to paint is the same, you can just put the price tag for painting as 500,000 as well using analogous. Parametric estimating means that your cost estimate will be based on parameters. So let's say that uh, you hire maybe a vendor, or you hire a particular expert or a particular skilled person on your project, and you're paying them per hour. Of course, that's going to be a parametric estimating, which means the total number of hours they spend on the project will determine how much we pay them. Or we can use another parameter. Let's say that the cost of tiling per square meter, including materials, the cost of tiling a house, including materials, is 20,000 per square meter. And I have a house of 100 square meters, right? That means that the cost of tiling will be 2 million, right? At 20,000 naira per square meter, right? And that's, what I've just done is I've used parametric estimates to determine the cost of painting. Bottom-up estimates, I'm just reminding you of these estimating methods. We've talked about them, but in this case, we're using them to estimate cost. In bottom-up estimate, whatever you want to estimate is first of all broken down into subtask, and then you now estimate each subtask and add up to get the final estimate. 3-point estimating is when we use either PERT or triangular distribution to calculate your estimate. Now, what is PERT? What is triangular distribution? They are the formulas that use pessimistic, optimistic, and realistic variables to estimate. So if we talk about 3-point estimating, right, for PERT, right, so let's say you want to buy particle, let's say cement, you want to buy cement, and you want to use a 3-point estimating, then we'll ask, what's the worst case scenario? What's the worst price for cement at that point in time? That's a pessimistic variable. What's the best case amount? That's the optimistic variable. What's the realistic price of cement? We can use 3-point estimates to estimate the cost of project activities or resources in a project. Then, since we have many estimating methods, we can look at different alternatives of estimating to decide the best estimating method. Then we've talked about reserve analysis. This is where we factor the cost of risk and create a contingency reserve. We also have what we call cost of quality. What does cost of quality mean? It is money you incur to ensure that a certain quality standard is achieved. It is money that you incur to ensure that a certain quality standard is achieved. That is your cost of quality. So in practical terms, if you are working on a project where you have to do some testing, the cost of those tests are going to be added into the cost of the activities of the project. It's called cost of quality. So when you're building a house and you do a soil test is part of your cost of quality. Or when you're doing concrete test, it's part of your cost of quality. It's the money you spend to ensure, and it's part of it's going to cost you. Then we can use project management software to calculate the cost of resources, right? Using software is easier. And then we can use decision-making techniques. If your team is going to vote on the cost, and of course, your team members have a lot of experience, they will also know some things about cost. So you can vote, and you can use fist of five voting to determine whether the estimate is accepted or not. And so voting is also something that can be done. So at the end of the day, what do we have? We have the cost estimate. That means for various project activities, you've started using the tools and techniques to come up with cost estimate. So, right, so we get the cost estimate of activities and their basis of estimate. So what is basis of estimate? Basis of estimate is a document that shows how we came about the cost estimate. So basis of estimate will look at the assumptions that were made for that cost estimate to be made. It will look at the range of possible estimates. It will look at the risk. It will look at several factors. So what am I saying is that when you create cost estimates using any of the techniques here, bottom-up, parametric, and logos, where you're also going to create a basis of estimate that helps anyone to understand how you came about the cost estimate. So the basis of estimate supports every estimate by giving the justification and context by which that cost estimate has been made. So that's what I'm saying. So the end of this process is to get cost estimates in our project for our project activities when we want to get cost estimates. So think about it. How do you go about costing project activities? How do you go about it's the resources that determine the cost, and then the risk, and then if you have to do testing, the cost of quality. All of these things are how we determine cost estimates. PMI has just put it in a process for us, right? Is the majorly the resources that determine the cost of project activities. So let's talk about estimates that can be made to serve as a guide in your project. When you're starting a project, the amount of uncertainty in the project is at its widest. When you're starting a project, the level of uncertainty, and we've talked about this in earlier classes, that the risk and level of uncertainty is at its highest when you're starting. And if uncertainty and risk are highest, then it means that you should have a wide range of cost estimate. And this wide range of cost estimate is called broad order of magnitude. And what does it mean? It means that when you're starting a project and you want to come up with an estimate, you can use a rough order of magnitude, which is minus 25%, 25% to plus 75%. Now, what does this rough order of magnitude mean? It means that if we want to estimate a project, at the beginning of that project, we should be ready to pay this amount between minus 25% to plus 75%. That means that if at the beginning of a project, the estimated amount for that project is $1 million, right? How much do you think you should keep aside for this project in terms of rough order of magnitude? Can someone help me? If I'm starting a project, right, and I have an estimated amount, and I want to ensure that I can sufficiently complete the project, how much will you advise me to keep aside? Anybody, please.
$250,000.
Okay, $250,000. So, it's minus 25% of the budget, right? It is minus the rough order of magnitude is minus 25. So you have to subtract that 250,000. So what do you get when you subtract 250,000 from a million?
At 750.
Okay. So it's from 750,000 to how much? How much? 750,000 to what?
Or let's say like 500,000 to 750,000.
No, it's not
I don't
500,000.
know.
No, it's not 500. 750,000 is the lower level of what you should have. What should be the higher level? If you look at rough order of
1.1
magnitude, yeah, okay, go ahead, author.
$1.75
Ye- yeah,
million
one
dollars.
million, that's it.
Is it not okay? Yeah, $1.75
Yes,
million dollars.
yes, that's correct. So that means now, why do you need this? So let's say that you want to work on a project and you are at the charter phase, you are developing the charter, and you just want to have a ballpark figure that this is, the worst case scenario, ballpark figure that you're going to use. You could say 1.75 million, or you could say the project has a rough order of magnitude of 750,000 to 1.75 million. That's at the charter level, because at the charter, so many things can be included, so many things can change when you start executing a project. So use rough order of magnitude. In fact, it's an intelligent way of communicating to customer. So the customer says, so how much do you think this project will cost? Well, okay, I'll say it has a rough order of magnitude of $750,000 to 1.75 million. So you are just giving them a range, you're not giving them a fixed amount, which is good at that level because you just have to be careful. So when you're starting a project or you're creating a project
Oh,
charter, you can use rough order of magnitude. Yeah, author, go ahead.
okay, is that range not too much? It's too wide. The range is too wide, very too wide.
Yes, I agree with you. So why is it wide? It's always better to have more than enough money to finish a project than to have less or just have just enough. Now, we're not saying that you must spend the 1.75. No, we're saying that if you have a worst case scenario, even that 1.75 should be able to take care of it. So it's just a wide range, right? It's a rough order of magnitude, like the worst case scenario. That's why. So it's not what you are going to end up spending, but depending on the risk in the project, you might even spend more. But we're just saying, just have a wide range, and that's how wide the range is. It doesn't necessarily mean that and of course, management, most company management won't do this, right? But it's just a way of safeguarding your budget. Yeah, Titi, go ahead.
Okay, so I think I'm a little bit confused. I thought you said estimate amount is $1 million,
Yes,
right?
yes,
So that's the estimate amount. Are you trying to say that we're going to have, because when it said, author said 1.75,
yeah.
where are we going to get the remaining like extra 750 from?
Okay, so what we're saying is this: you want to start a project. We want to have a figure we can work with. So someone says is estimated at $1 million. And we, there are a lot of things we don't know yet about the project. We're at the charter phase. And so we want to use rough order of magnitude as a wide range to say, okay, worst case scenario is going to run from between 750,000 to 1.75 million. It's not the actual budget you're allocating for the project. It's something that is a range that we can consider at the project charter, but when it comes to actual budgeting of your project, you are going to be more strict and is going to be more focused on actual values. You get what I'm saying? For starters, you can use this range. I hope you get me, Titi. Do you get what I'm saying?
No, I don't.
Okay, okay. I'm just thinking about an example. So think about, yeah, trying to plan for a party and you just want a very quick estimate and you're just saying, how much is this? This is going to be cost this. You're not getting the facts. You're just doing the worst case scenario. This should cost this. This should cost that. This should cost that. This should cost. But you're not dealing with exact figures. And then you now end up with a large sum, right? Because you have not done detailed estimating. So when we use rough order of magnitude, it's just a safeguard to say the worst that can happen on this project is 1.75 billion. It's not the actual project budget. I hope you get what I'm saying. It's just a safeguard.
Okay, I want to ask a question. Are you trying to say that the range will always be like it's fixed? It's always going to be minus 25% to
Awesome.
75%?
Yes, that is a rough order of magnitude. So I can use this if I'm trying to create a business case and I'm trying to see, will this project be worth it? And I'm using rough order of magnitude. And if it still makes sense with the rough order of magnitude, then it means it makes a lot of sense. So I can just use rough order of magnitude as a way of looking at worst case scenarios, right? At the business case level, and then at the charter level. And then when I'm going into detailed planning, I now start getting the actual amount. It's like when you're trying to budget for something and you say, worst case scenario, 3 million or 4 million or 5 million will cover this. But in your mind, you know that you're not going to spend up to that. I don't know if you guys get me. Do you guys get me? Rough order of magnitude is just um, something like that's why it's called rough. Is the word rough estimates. I think that's the best thing. It's a rough order. It's a rough estimate of your project. It's not a fine-tuned estimate. It's a rough estimate. And we use this range. Does it make sense now? Can I get a feedback? I think that
I
helps.
think it does because
Yes.
since you said it's fixed, so
Yes. Yes. Because if you're using the term rough order of magnitude, is the same everywhere. It's a rough estimate about a project. It does not necessarily mean it is the estimate, final estimate for your project. Right. So that's what it is. But when you get to the executing stage, right, we have a more narrow range of -5 to +10%. When you're just starting out, your range is -25 to +75. But when you get to executing, with the amount of information you have, your cost range can vary between -5 to +10%. Why is it so wide at the beginning and so narrow towards the end? It's because of the amount of information you have. When you're starting a project, right, the information you have about that project may not be much. And so it makes sense that you use the rough order of magnitude because you just need a rough estimate. So you can use it during initiating, right? Because so your rough order of magnitude is the widest estimate. But what happens after you complete project initiation is that you're going to go from initiating to planning, right? And when you go to planning, what happens is that during project planning, you're going to get more information. And the more information you have helps you to narrow down your cost estimates from -25 to +75 to something more definite or definitive. Do you get the concept? The concept is, as I begin to plan my project, look at alternatives, cost, materials, I now start getting a final picture so that when I get to the executing stage, if I'm expecting any variation, it's going to be between -5 to +10%. So this is just showing us the level of accuracy at different times in your project, moving from the rough order of magnitude, where you get your rough estimate, to definitive, where you've gone through proper planning, proper research, you've costed items, and then you now have a -5 to +10% variation at executing. So that's what it means. Okay. So let's talk about the next process. What's the next process? It's called determine budget. It's called determine budget. Okay, I think we should go for a break because I just realized that it's 9 o'clock. So let me just say something, then we take our break. So determine budget is where we add up all the cost of project activities to create what we call a cost baseline. Determine budget is where we add up all project activities to create what we call the cost baseline. All the project activities are added up to create the cost baseline. And what happens here is that all the activities, remember, we talked about how to estimate project activities. So this is where we talked about estimating cost. What we're actually costing here is the cost of each activity in your project. Determine budget is now saying, okay, you've costed all the activities. Let's add up all the activities of the project to create the budget. So this is what we are talking about here. So when we come back from break, we're going to see how the cost estimates for all our project activities are added together to create the budget of the project. And that's all, that's what we're talking about. So let's have a 10-minute break so that we can cool down a bit and come back. Please, the second half of this class is very important because 50% of all the calculations you might find in the PMP exam is in this particular knowledge area. So please come because we're going to be doing some calculations and value management, and you want to really understand that. Okay, So I'm going to take, pause. So determine budget is where we add up all the cost to get the total project budget, or what we call the cost baseline. Now, in order to do this, we have a number of things to consider, which are the inputs. Of course, the cost management plan gives us the, the control thresholds, the limits to the budget. The resource management plan, is important because of the logistics of your resources. Now, take for example, you have a team and they have to travel out or travel to another country. They have to lodge in a hotel for a couple of days. Your resource management plan gives us that information so that we can include logistics cost into the project. Then we have what we call the scope baseline. Now, the scope baseline includes the deliverables of the project, and we should also cost the deliverables and the work packages associated with those deliverables. Now, we have the cost estimates of each activity in our project, and we also have the project schedule. Now, what is the project schedule doing here? The project schedule is important because we want to create what we call a cost baseline. And what is a cost baseline? It is a time-based budget. It's not your regular budget. The project schedule helps us to see the amount of money we need per time. When we put it in the cost baseline, you'll see in the next couple of slides what the cost baseline looks like. Now, we also factor in overall project risk. We factor overall project risk. And what do I mean by overall project risk? This is where we create something called management reserve. Now, when we were talking about activities, we talked about contingency reserve. Now we're talking about management reserve. Right, we look at management reserves that we could add to the overall project budget. Then we can compare the project budget with what we had initially in the business case. In the business case, you have a budget for your project, right? You can even use rough order of magnitude in the business case level, right? But now you want to compare your business case with your actual budget. And the benefit management plan shows how project benefits will be coming up in your project. Now, contract agreement. What is this doing here? If you have outsourced some part of your project, the cost of those contracts should be added into the project budget. And that's basically what we're saying. So expert judgment is a tool and technique. An accountant or someone that has knowledge about cost accounting can help us to add up all the costs. And that's what we call cost aggregation. Cost aggregation is saying add up all the costs, add up all the cost estimates, add up all the contract agreements, add up all the logistics costs so that we can get the project budget. That's cost aggregation. I've talked about reserve analysis, and this is where we add an extra amount of money to take care of risk in a project. It means there are two levels of risk in our budget. Then historical information review. What does this talk about? Historical information review is talking about using past historical information in your organization. So if someone has handled that same project in your organization, we can use that information as historical information to check that your budget is in line with expectation. So we can use that. Then we have funding limit reconciliation and financing. Let me talk about financing first. Financing is where you ensure that the funds are secured for the project. Maybe by ensuring that the account that be used to manage the project is funded, or by, if it's a government project, financing can mean that you are selling treasury bills to raise the money. So financing is one of the things that is done when you are trying to get your budget ready. And then let's talk about funding limit reconciliation. Now, what does funding limit reconciliation mean? The word funding limit is there. So let's say that for the first 6 months of your project, so we're working on the project, first 6 months of the project, and you look at the activities lined up for the first 6 months of your project, and you cost all those activities, and you just discover that you're going to need 100 million, right? You're going to need 100 million to cover project activities for the first 6 months, right? So this is what you need. Now, when it comes to capital budgeting funding projects, your client doesn't always give you all the money. In fact, they give you a part payment, and you can sometimes use your own capital to complete the project, and then they reimburse you. So funding limit reconciliation is where the client has given us part payment, right? So let's say the client is given 60 million, right, for the first phase of the project. And if we don't, so this is a funding limit that we need to reconcile, because if we don't reconcile, when the project budget is exhausted, that's the 60 million, project will stop. So we need to reconcile, we need to reconcile the remaining 40 million. So what happens is that the organization may decide to borrow or finance, right, the remaining 40 million. And that is reconciling the funding limit. Because if we don't, the moment the project, the 60 million is spent, the project will get stuck. Now, funding limit reconciliation is done in planning, not in execution. This process determined budget is under the planning process group, which means everything we're talking about here is about planning for your project. Budgeting is planning. So reconciling your funding limit is done at the planning stage, where your team is asking themselves, how do we reconcile the funding limit that the client has imposed on us? And that's what we're talking about. So at the end of the day, in determining the budget, we create the cost baseline, what we call the cost baseline, and the project funding requirements. Now, let's look at this. So this is the process of budgeting your project. Let me summarize it. Bring all your costs together. Bring all the logistic costs together. Bring all the contract costs together and create a total budget. And you can now have the cost baseline when you determine how much money you're going to be spending per time in your project, right? That is how you create the cost baseline. Okay, so let's look at how your project is in terms of cost structure. So the first thing that we did was we costed activities. And how did we cost activities? We looked at the resources assigned to each activity and we got the cost estimate. But while we were costing activities, we also talked about risk, that if there's a risk involved in your activity, you can now add a contingency reserve, an activity contingency reserve, which is an amount of money that have been kept aside for risk for your project activities. Now, when you add up all the activity contingency reserves in your project up, so all the activity contingency reserve, if you add them up, it gives us the full contingency reserve for the project. All right. So I want to paint a picture so that you understand what I'm saying. So your project is made up of activities. Each activity, you're going to cost the activity based on the resources you're going to use for the activity. And then you keep some money aside. So let's say that you want to take a trip. You keep some money aside just in case a flat tire or something happens, a risk happens. Now, which means that each activity in your project is meant to have its own activity contingency reserve. Now, when you add all the activity contingency reserves together for your project, it becomes the contingency reserve for the entire project, which means that your project is going to have some form of buffer to take care of risk on activities. That is the contingency reserve. Then when you add up all the activity cost estimates, you're going to get the cost of the work packages. Why? Activities fall under the work packages. So when you add all the activity cost estimates together, we get all the work package cost estimates together. Now, this is what determines the cost baseline. So the cost baseline is the cost of all your activities or work packages plus all the contingency reserve. So if I'm going to write a formula, I'll say cost baseline. Cost baseline is what? Is equal to the contingency reserve of all your activities plus the cost of the work packages. Right, that's your cost baseline. But guess what? We still have a project budget. And the project budget is not the same thing as a cost baseline. So what's going on here? I thought we were talking about the budget. We are talking about the budget, but there's something you need to know. And what is that? If you look at this process, it's called determine budget, but the output of the process is cost baseline, not project budget. Why don't we have project budget as the output, even if it's the budget we're trying to create? The reason why the project budget is not the output is because the cost baseline is what the project manager gets for his project or our project. The cost baseline is what the project manager gets for his or her project. That means that in a project, the project manager only has access to the cost baseline. It doesn't have access to the full project budget. Why is this? So let me write another formula. And this formula is for the entire project budget. Project budget is equal to cost baseline plus management reserve. Okay, that's what this is. The cost baseline plus management reserve. Okay. Now, why is this important? That means that what the project manager doesn't have access to is management reserve, right? Because they have access to cost baseline. So why don't they have access to management reserve? The project manager doesn't have access to management reserve because management reserve is created for unknown risk, while contingency reserve is created for known risk, right? So that means when you do proper project budgeting, there's an amount of money that should be left aside for risk we don't know exist, but just happen, right? And there's some risk you know exists, like, for example, so contingency reserves are money you keep aside for known risk. What do I mean by known risk? So if you drive here, right, and you are taking a trip, if you drive and you're taking a trip and you, at some point, you have a flat tire, you know, you're not going to come out of the car and you're like, how did this happen? I've never seen this before. You've seen it many times. It's a known risk. So contingency reserve is the money we keep aside to deal with risk we know can happen and have happened before. Management reserve is money that we keep aside for risk we don't even know exist, but can show up. Let me give you a good example of management reserve. Of unknown risk, not management. A good example of unknown risk was COVID, because nobody knew there was anything called COVID until it came. It took everybody by surprise. That means that if you are managing a project during COVID, if you didn't have management reserve, that project would have suffered because COVID was an unknown risk. So management reserve is money kept aside for known risk. But the project manager has money for known risk. It doesn't have money for known risk. So what happens is that when unknown risk happens, the project manager can ask for management reserve and it will now be transferred into its cost baseline. So even though the project manager is not in charge of management reserve, they can request for it if unknown risk happens. This is how PMI says we should budget our project. Now, one more diagram, and this is another view of the cost baseline. And this view is very good because it shows you that the cost baseline is showing how money is spent with time. You can see time on the x-axis and cumulative value of cost on the y-axis. So let me just put some context to this diagram so that you can understand it. So let's imagine that this is one phase of your project. This is another phase of your project. This is another phase of your project. And this is the final, is the end of project. Now, the cost baseline shows how much money is spent on your project per time. So let's say that the first phase of project is in the 6 months time period. And in 6 months, based on the activities scheduled for the project, we're expected to spend about 100 million. So this is 100 million. Okay. Then let's say 9 months into the project, we finish the next phase in 9 months' time. And let's say in that phase, the total amount we'll have spent in total from beginning of project is about 250 million. 250 M. Right. And then maybe this is the third phase. In the 15th month, we finish the third phase. And the total amount spent on the third phase is how much? 450 million. 450 million. And at the end of the project, we're expecting, which is the 20th month, the project is expected to have spent 550 million. Right. Okay. And then management reserve is 650 million. No, management reserves brings the total project budget to 650 million. That's it. Now, imagine that, let me put the phases. This is the first phase. This is the second phase, B, phase B, phase C, and phase D. So now, another thing we see is a project funding requirement. Project funding requirement is the money you need to move from one phase to the other. Of course, from the beginning of the project to the completion of phase A, we need 100 million. To move from phase A to B is moving from 100 million to 250 million. That means the money we need, the project funding requirement to move from phase A to B is 150 million. What about B to C? How much do we need? What is the project funding requirement to move from B to C? Can someone tell me? What is the project funding requirement?
200.
200 million. Yeah, that's 450 minus. What about from C to D? What's the project funding requirement? Who's going to help me? Who's helping me? 100 million. Thank you. What about, what's the management reserve? What's the management reserve? Who's helping me?
100.
100, 650 million. Now, does this thing make sense now? It should. Do you know that you can budget a project using this if you know how to use Excel? Right. So your next project, right, try and cost it and then create a cumulative curve. Now, cumulative curve is S-shaped. If you're creating a cumulative curve in statistics, it will always give you an S-shape. So the cost baseline being a cumulative curve is actually S-shaped in nature. With Excel, you can create this kind of thing and then be tracking your budget and see what it is. So that is that. And then finally, we're going to talk about the topic we've been waiting for, which is control cost. And the topic within control cost we've been waiting for is called end value management. End value management. So what does end value management mean? That's what we want to look. So I'm going to go straight into this, but let me paint a picture of what's going on. Now, this is a monitoring and controlling process. It's important you know the process group of your process, because when you're monitoring and controlling, it means that we're looking for variance if it exists and making corrections. So control cost means that we have started the project, we've started expending cash, we started spending money. I want to know whether our budget is under control or whether we've gone way over budget. We can use these techniques. The first one I'm going to talk about is end value management. And this is a very powerful tool that you can use to track project budget. So, and we've actually waited a while because we were meant to talk about end value management at the end of schedule, but thankfully we can do it now. So let's look at end value management. So for you to perform end value management, you need, what do we need? We need a project. So I'm going to simulate a project very quickly. And what I need for a project is scope, time, and cost. So let me start with scope. So the scope of a project is to paint the four walls of a commercial building, 4 external walls of a commercial building using paint number 43429 UHG5Z. Right, so the scope is clear. We want to paint the 4 external walls of a commercial building using a particular paint. Now, the time schedule. It's going to take 1 wall to paint each wall. Therefore, the total project schedule is what? 4 days. It's 4 days. Right. It's going to take, sorry, I said 1 wall, 1 day to paint each wall. And let's go to cost. Cost, it costs $2,000 to paint each wall. Therefore, total project budget is what? Is $8,000 since there are 4 sites. $8,000. Now, you cannot do end value management without information about the project. That's why I had to spend time to create this. Now that I have information, let's look at the 3 steps of end value analysis. The first step of end value analysis is to get your end value variables. And what are your end value variables? PV, EV, and AC. PV, EV, and AC. Now, PV stands for planned value, and PV is also known as BCWS. In fact, the older name for plan value is BCWS. And the older name is better. You know why? It tells us what plan value is. Plan value is the budgeted cost of work schedule. That's your plan value. Then we have end value. In end value, it's also known as BCWP. And what's BCWP? It is end value is the same thing as budgeted cost of work performed. And AC is actual cost, and ACWP. AC is the same thing as ACWP, just like EV is the same thing as BCWP, and it means actual cost of work performed. Now that we spelled out everything, let's try and get step one for this project. So we can, of course, this is a project, and this is our plan. So this is actually a plan. Now, let's say that this project started yesterday morning, the painting project started yesterday morning, and we are now at the end of the second day. The project started yesterday morning. We're now in the evening of the second day. And I asked you, it's a 4-day project, right? So if you start yesterday morning, it should be at the end of day 2 now. So if I ask you, what is the planned value? What am I asking you? What is the budgeted cost of work schedule? Now I'm going to ask you, what have I scheduled for 2 days in this project based on the information? Can someone help me? What have I scheduled for 2 days based on this information? Can someone help me, please?
To paint the 4 external walls.
So what am I doing in 2 days? Remember that I want to paint one wall party. So if I've used...
So paint for 2 days, that means you paint 2 walls.
So how much is 2 walls? What's the budget for 2 walls?
It costs 1,000 for 1 wall, then 2 will be 4,000.
It costs 2,000 per wall.
So for per 1, then for 2 it will be 4,000.
Thank you. So my planned value is $4,000 based on where I am in the project. It's 4,000. If the project was at the end of the 3rd day, my planned value, because what have I scheduled for 3 days? 3 walls. What's the budget for 3 walls? 6,000. But because we're at the end of the 2nd day, I look at what have I scheduled for 2 days? 2 walls. And what's the budget for 2 walls? 4,000. So planned value would be 4,000. Then I look at end value. What is end value? Budgeted cost of work performed. Now just imagine that I get a report at the end of the 2nd day that only 1 wall has been painted in 2 days. With that information, I now ask you, what is the end value? And what's the end value? The budgeted cost of work performed. So what was performed? Only 1 wall was painted in 2 days. So what's the budget for that wall that was performed? Who's going to help me? Who's going to help me quickly? Who's going to help me? What's the budget for the work that was done?
$2,000.
$2,000. Thank you. So $2,000 of work was done. At this time, you are the PM and you are flipping. Why are you flipping? Your project is clearly behind schedule. And you're wondering how a simple painting project can be causing you stress. So the moment you see that the report is stating that only 1 wall has been painted, you just call the painter and you are unleashing anger on him. If you know you couldn't do the job, you should have left it. They're upset. So after venting for some time, the painter now tried to explain himself. And he said that on the 1st day, when he wanted to start painting, he realized that his own paint specification was 6Z and not 5Z. And he didn't want to risk it because 6Z could be a different color entirely. And of course, just imagine a bank that has its own unique color, and if they're finding out that the color you painted is not their color, you have to do the work all over. So knowing that he could not use that paint, he left to get the paint on the first day. And unfortunately, he could not get the paint. And when he was about to give up around 6 p.m., someone told him to check a new store that is possible they may have it. To his surprise, he found the paint. But guess what? It was now $1,000 more than what he budgeted. He had to spend $1,000 more than what he budgeted. My question now is, what is his actual cost? What did it actually cost him? Can someone help me? What did it actually cost him?
Can you repeat the question again?
So when he eventually found the right paint, it costed him $1,000 more than budgeted. The question is, what is his actual cost for the work performed? If it costed him $1,000 more than budgeted, how much is that?
30,000.
3,000.
Mm-hmm. So the moment we can get EV, PV, AC, we are in business. You can do environmental analysis. If you can't get these three, you cannot do. So the next thing you do is you go to step 2, calculate CPI, CV, SPI, SV. CPI and CV are for cost analysis on your project. SPI, SV are for schedule analysis of your project. Cost analysis and schedule analysis. Right. Now, we are going to use these variables, PV, EV, AC, and arrange them in a particular way to get CPI, CV, SPI, SV. If you notice, if you look at the formulas very well, we're not going beyond EV, PV, and AC. So EV over AC is CPI, EV minus AC is CV. SPI is EV divided by PV, SV is EV minus PV, right? And so now the results we get from CPI, CV will tell us how far we're performing in cost. The result we get from SPI and SV tells us how far we are performing in the schedule. So this brings us to the next step. Then we can interpret the result from step 2. If CPI is equal to 1 and CV is 0, then the project is on budget. If CPI is greater than 1 and CV is positive, then the project is under budget. If CPI is less than 1 and CV is negative, then the project is over budget. If SPI is equal to 1 and SV is 0, then the project is on schedule. If SPI is greater than 1 and SV is positive, then the project is ahead of schedule. And if SPI is less than 1 and SV is negative, the project is behind schedule. So let me show you just one scenario, and we'll call it a day. So let's say I'm working on a project where the planned value is $60,000. The end value is $40,000, and the actual cost is $80,000. This is what I'm working with. What do? I go to step 1 and I calculate CPI. CPI is EV over AC. EV over AC is 40,000 over 80,000, which is 0.5. CV is EV minus AC. That's $40,000 minus $80,000. That gives me minus $40,000. Minus $40,000. SPI is EV over PV, which is 40,000 over 60,000, which gives me 0.67, 0.67. And SV is 40,000 minus 60,000, which gives me minus $20,000. Now, taking it here, in fact, let me just do 40,000. Now, let me show you something, how to remember the formulas. All you have to remember is if you write it like this, the I's are divided. So 40,000 divided by EV divided by AC, it will be a division between them. But if it's a variance, it will be negative EV minus AC. Here is EV 40,000 divided by PV. Here is EV minus, variances have minus, indices have division. So that can help you remember. But now that we've calculated everything, what can we say about this project? CPI is less than 1. And CV is negative. It means this project is over budget. Let's look at SPI. SPI is less than 1, and SV is behind schedule. SV is negative, minus 20,000. It means that this project is over budget and behind schedule. This is the power of end value management. This project could be anywhere in the world, but you don't even have to be there to know what's going on. Just get these 3 variables and you can interpret what is going on in your project. So, one last thing. If you notice, CV is cost variance. CV is actually talking about money. And what is cost variance? Cost variance is telling us that we've gone over budget by $40,000. That's what CV is telling us. We've gone over budget by 40,000. How do I know? Budgeted cost of work performed is 40,000. Actual cost of work performed is 80. So we went over budget by another 40,000. So CV is referring to money. Schedule variance is not really talking about money, but it's using money to talk about time. You know, we literally say time is money. So when you get a schedule variance of minus $20,000, what it means, we're not really talking about money. We're talking about we are behind schedule by this value of work, which could be 1 task, 2 tasks, 3 tasks. Until we check our schedule, we won't know. But this is showing us that the value of work that we should have covered that is outstanding is worth this amount. And that's it. So we will stop here because I've exhausted my time and I've borrowed out of yours, which I do apologize about. And we will call it a day. So this is what's going to happen. Just a minute before we go. Don't forget tomorrow is Wednesday, and I'm not really available on Wednesdays. So that's why I do a 2-hour recording. Please don't skip it. Please watch it because it's likely I'm going to build on it. But this part where we are is very critical, and I didn't get to complete it tonight. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move to another chapter tomorrow. That's quality. And even if you've missed any part, don't worry. We're starting a new chapter tomorrow. And you can always catch up with the other parts. So on Thursday, when we meet, I'm going to complete this cost part, right? Because we still have about 2 or 3 more calculations. And then we'll resume back to quality. The only reason I'm doing this is that this part can get very technical. And I don't want you to be confused. So again, apologies for the time, and we will call it a day now. Yes.
Mr. Akin, please, can this class be available in 30 minutes time?
The earliest is 1 hour because it takes
Okay.
that it takes about, when I end the class now, it takes